Hello investors and welcome back to Tech Industries. Today's video is going to be about Majora's Mask 3DS, but it's not going to be about the game as a game, it's going to be about the game as a remake and to see how it stands up to the original Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. I'm going to initially just say I think it's a great game and I love Majora's Mask, so I'm not really going to be reviewing the game itself. I'm going to be reviewing the remake as a remake. So, let's get into it. The first thing I want to get into is visual presentation. Majora's Mask 3DS had a much lighter looking visual display than the original on the Nintendo 64. Whether this was intentional or not, where this definitely makes the game more visually appealing, it did detract from the darkness of the game, which was one of its major unique aspects when it came out. Another thing I want to touch on is the moon. The redesign of the moon is simply goofier looking. It doesn't quite have that chill effect when you look up and realize that the moon is there, because, well, no one plays through the game looking at the moon the whole time, but it's that reminder, you know, that the clock is ticking down. But in the original version, the fright effect, sort of, that the game had on you is just not present in the 3DS version. So visually, is the game good or bad? I'd still call it a good game. It detracts from the darkness to an extent that I'm okay with, since I'm not necessarily a huge fan of dark things to begin with. I definitely think they could have done it better, but not by much. It's still very nice, clean looking. As far as the actual visuals themselves, they're very clean and good. There's no problems with them, but tying into the actual game itself, they are a little bit light. Next thing I want to touch on is the controls. The controls are far better than they were in the Nintendo 64 version. Be it because the N64's analog stick was more limited, or the frame rate dropped on the N64, in this version of the game, the controls are they're just better. There's not much more to say on it. One complaint that I do hear a lot is with the Zora mask, you don't automatically swim fast. You have to use the shield to do that. And where I can see people complaining about this, I think it actually makes the game a lot easier and a lot more manageable when you're trying to do the Zora swimming sequences, especially with that stupid beaver race, which is actually still part of a good game. The next thing that I've heard a complaint on, I even heard the completionist complain about this, is the motion controls in the game. Whenever you pull out your bow, it immediately goes to the gyroscope inside your 3DS. I absolutely love this feature. It makes the shooting gallery segments a whole lot more manageable. It makes everything just a lot more manageable. It makes your actions more swift, and you can definitely do things a lot quicker with the motion controls in the 3DS. I can understand people not liking motion controls in general, but I really don't see any downsides to this unless you're riding in a car. But thankfully there is a turn-off switch for those situations. Here's one thing I've tried to avoid saying throughout this whole thing is that the game is easier. The game feels initially like it's an easier game than the original game was, but here is why. Simply put, the frame rate is consistent, and the controls are much better. Because of the Nintendo 64's limitations, the frame rate of the game dropped a lot, and especially during the Majora's Mask boss fight. This is just simply because the N64 was a weaker system, and Majora's Mask came out later in its life cycle, so it demanded a lot more power from the N64. So when people come around saying that Majora's Mask 3DS is easier than Majora's Mask was, it's not necessarily that the game is easier, it's that the game is better optimized. The lack of difficulty in the game is not due to the game being made easier, it's due to the limitations of the previous game being taken away. So whether you want to technically say that it's easier or not, the actual game hasn't changed. The game has actually been more put into a pure form by those definitions. One thing that I absolutely loved about this game is that you could save without quitting or resetting time. I've seen some complaints about this saying it's not really true to the original, but what I used to do with the original anyway was save, quit, load the game back up, and then start playing again. This basically just took out those middle steps. It doesn't really change the game at all. So that's really all I have to say. Aside from changing the placement of a few objects, most of the change comes down to the visual style and the controls. Two major things that were defined at the time by the N64's hardware limitations. Whether it makes the game better or worse really depends on if you really wanted the darkness in the game to be preserved, or whether you just really wanted the game to be ported over, because as the game, it definitely exists, but with a little less of the darkness. Overall, my personal opinion about the game is it's fantastic. I love it. I've loved it ever since it was on the N64, and I think the remake does it justice very, very well. If you haven't played Majora's Mask at all, I would not really recommend playing the N64 version first, as there's really not much that you're missing with this version. If you're a retro gamer, definitely play the old one first, but if you're just a casual gamer who wants to try to get into the Zelda franchise, play Ocarina of Time 3D first, because it literally takes place directly before this and is the essential Zelda title. Majora's Mask is for Zelda players who have at least dipped their toes in the universe first. So if you haven't played a Zelda game, play Ocarina of Time 3D. I'd highly recommend the 3D version. If you haven't played Majora's Mask, definitely pick up the 3DS version. It is fantastic. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video, which probably won't be a review because I don't do these very much. Thank you.